Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's session on sporting heritage and evaluation. My name's Emma King. I'm going to be your chair for the next hour for this session, and I'm really looking forward to spending this time in your company and that of our two highly experienced panellists, who are Sue Hayton, the Associate Director of the Centre for Cultural Value at the University of Leeds, and Dr. Justine Reilly, who's the Director of Sporting Heritage. We're really fortunate to have Jo in the background, Jo Boardman, who's providing technical support for this session, and she'll be helping me manage the chat. So if you've got any technical difficulties with today at all, please do contact Jo through the chat function and she'll do her best to help. We do have closed captioning available, so Jo will place a note telling you how to access that if you need it. The format for this afternoon is really straightforward. We're all going to introduce ourselves shortly. I have a brief introduction and a few initial questions for Sue and Justine. And after that, we're open to questions from the floor. So this is a panel discussion. It's not a series of formal presentations, and we really need input from you to make this session as good and as relevant as it can be. Please do use the chat to introduce yourselves, share your experiences and perspectives on evaluation, and to obviously ask any questions that you've got for us. We'll collate any links that are shared and we'll circulate them afterwards, together with copies of any presentations that we use. So you won't need to write anything down unless you really want to, just concentrate on the conversation. If we have too many questions to get through in this session, we'll make sure we address them in the following up information that we send through. So without further ado, I'll tell you a bit about myself first. I'm Emma, as I said. I'm a museum consultant. I've worked in the museums and heritage sector for about 25 years now, give or take. And more than half of that as an independent consultant, though I've worked in senior management in large and small heritage organisations as well. So in those roles, I've sometimes been responsible for commissioning evaluation work from other people. These days, my main focus is helping organisations with strategic planning, interpretation, and of course, evaluation. And my work in evaluation is really tied to strategic development and forward planning. So it's about understanding the difference our work makes in heritage, finding out how we can increase our impact and be more inclusive and responsive to the communities that we work with. I've written a couple of evaluation case studies for the new Sporting Heritage online toolkit. So do look out for the launch date for that in a webinar next month, and look out for those when they go live. So I'll come to Sue next. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, Sue?
I can, thanks, and hello everyone. Thanks very much, Justine and Sporting Heritage, for inviting me to participate in this. I always enjoy talking about evaluation, and I'd be really interested to hear from everyone of their experiences and questions as well. My background is within the cultural sector, so I've had a very long career, over 30 years now working within the culture and creative sector, and I started in the commercial sector, actually, in publishing and design. And then when I moved up to Yorkshire many years ago, I started working in the arts and in culture and in heritage. And I spent quite some time as a director and producer working in dance, but community-based dance in Yorkshire. And as part of that, obviously, was involved in the evaluation of those kinds of community-based projects. In the late 90s, I set up my own consultancy, Hayton Associates, and the late 90s was a time when there was more and more interest in the kinds of evaluation of community-based creative projects, certainly within heritage. And I did a number of national evaluation programs for Arts Council England, Heritage Lottery Fund, as it was then, and for the DCMS. Some considerable experience working directly as an evaluator and working with colleagues like Emma as well along that journey. I now work as an Associate Director Policy Engagement for the Centre for Cultural Value, and the centre was established 2 years ago as a means to, and it's based at the University of Leeds, but works across the UK, to build a shared understanding of the differences arts, heritage, culture and screen can make to people's lives. So very much at the heart of understanding what is actually the value of cultural participation to the individual and to communities. And my role within the centre is to actually liaise with policymakers. So I'm kind of at that end of evaluation where we're looking at what the results are, but then using it hopefully to influence decision making at a policy level and with funders as well. And the centre produces a number of resources. Evaluation is a really key part of the work that we do, and skills development around evaluation is something that we feel is a real priority. I'll go on to talk a little bit later about the evaluation principles that we've launched last week. We synthesize research as well. So what's the existing research out there that helps us to understand what the value of culture is? And the aim is that we then bring that together and make it really widely available so people have access to it, and we're not always starting from square one in terms of our understanding. I've already talked about the policy and work we do with funders. We have small funding pot as well to encourage people to work with researchers and with academics. So check out the website, that's live at the moment. Small amount of funding, but it's there, and we'd really like to encourage people to take advantage of that. And also, you know, developing those skills, especially in evaluation. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Sue. Justine, I feel like you probably don't need any introduction in this format, but go on, tell us a bit about yourself.
I never get to sit in this seat. Thanks so much, Emma. And it's really good to see you guys. Yeah, so basically my background, I began working in the broadcast sector in TV, and then kind of shifted back across. My degrees had been in history, so shifted back across to work at Liverpool museums. And even from right at the start, the work that I was doing was around audiences and communities and consultation. And I had an amazing line manager there whose focus was, we need to understand about what our audiences want, because if we don't, we won't be able to input that into delivering our programs. We also need to understand why we aren't doing things right. So I kind of had that embedded in me right at the start of my kind of museum and heritage journey, and it's come with me the whole way. So when I finished working there, I then went and worked at the Media Museum in Bradford, and I worked there within their education department. So again, always looking at what we were delivering, who our audiences were, what they were gaining from what we were doing, and what we needed to do better. So I kind of had it from that perspective in terms of being within the sector and delivering evaluation that way. And then I worked for Museums, Libraries and Archives Council, and back in the BBC, but as within part of their outreach. And a lot of that work was looking at bringing in consultants to deliver evaluation activity for me. So it was seeing it from both sides in terms of somebody independent coming and examining the work and seeing, so what is working, why isn't it working, who do you need to work with more closely? And then following that, I also became a consultant very similarly to Emma, and did quite a lot of evaluation work. And what I worked out was that generally I would be brought in to do that work as part of a project, but it wasn't part of something that was embedded across the programme of work that the organisation did. So I'd come in and do the work, I'd say all these things, and then I'd go again, but none of that kind of information was then part of what the organisation did. And that's kind of, again, stuck with me in terms of why is that? And I think part of it is that short, and you're going to ask me again in a minute, I think, but it's part of that short-term funding, isn't it? And the reasons why we do it. And it's something that we've embedded within Sporting Heritage. From the start, when I set this up, oh crikey, 10 years ago now, new enough, it's been part of what we do. We're always going back, looking at the audience, looking at the sector, asking, what do you want, what do you need, are we doing it? And if we're not, let's change what we're doing. And every bit of work that we do has automatically got it embedded within it, and then we're always bringing other people in, which I'll talk about in a moment, about the recent piece of work that we did. But yeah, so evaluation, and I know we've spoken about this quite a lot, is something that I feel is absolutely crucial to our work and crucial to what I do, but it is something that can so often be that kind of added thing that's a little bit difficult and a little bit different, and you're already really busy. So yeah, I hope I keep that in my role. But yeah, I'm interested to hear the questions from the panels and talk to you guys.
Yeah, you said a number of things that resonated with me, Justine. I think the first is, I think you and I probably had a similar start to our careers, because I got into evaluation through audience research initially, and that was at Liverpool, that was at National Museums Liverpool, where they had a really active audience research department, and we were always asking, is this working for visitors? What do people need? Who are the people that are not coming? Why are they not coming? What can we do? And there was a real kind of culture of questioning and of learning that helped get me started on this track to thinking about evaluation. I think the other thing was that aspect of coming in as a consultant and evaluating a project or a piece of work and then going away again, and then being left with that question, well, has anything really changed? And I tend not to do, I still do sometimes do end of project evaluations, but I tend to do less of that these days, because I find it much more interesting to be thinking about evaluation from a more strategic perspective. What difference can it make? How are we going to use this information going forward? So that's how I tend to kind of position things these days. And I think, I know Sue, you and I have discussed this over the years as well, about the importance of doing those kind of looking back over a project's pieces of work, but also the limitations and sometimes the frustration of that approach. I was asked to say a little bit about what evaluation is and why it matters, and I think Justine's covered some of that already. I mean, for me, it's essentially a process of critically assessing the value of what you do based on collecting feedback from stakeholders in a really systematic way. And the importance of that is that it's fundamentally about learning. So about understanding what's working, what's not working, but why is it not working? And then what do we do as a result? So answering those questions, what difference are we making? Who are we making it for? And how can we do it better? So in that respect, I think evaluation is really forward thinking. It might start from the standpoint of what's happened, how has it happened, why has it happened? But actually the really important question is what next? What change do we need to see as a result? What do we need to do differently? Who are we not including? Whose voice is missing from this conversation? And I think if it's used in that way, it can really help you go to the heart of your mission as an organisation. And if it's really going to answer those questions, it needs to be an ongoing thing, as Justine was saying, that's built into your strategic planning processes, because fundamentally, good evaluation enables better decision making. And that's kind of what we're all hoping to achieve in organisations. I do think, though, that it can become very mysterious, because there's no one way to approach evaluation. It can be perceived as a difficult subject with a kind of no easy entry point. And there's so many techniques, frameworks, methodologies out there that it can become really baffling. And I think it's really about understanding what you need in your context, what works for you based on where you're at and what you want to find out. And I would really recommend looking at the new Sporting Heritage online toolkit when that's launched next month. It's a really good resource for just cutting through a lot of the noise and getting some really practical, useful advice about different approaches to evaluation. I can see we've got a question, so while I have a little comment, so while I have a look at that, I'm just going to ask Sue to talk a bit about your perspective from the Centre for Cultural Value. I got a great email newsletter from your organisation the other day that was entitled, "We need to talk about the E word." And I thought that kind of brilliantly encapsulates how I think many people do see evaluation. It's a bit like a swear word. We don't really talk about it. So I'd just like to ask you, why do we need to talk about evaluation? And to just talk us through a little bit some of the work that you've been doing recently at the Centre for Cultural Value.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. Yeah, why do we need to talk about the E word? And it's a thought, you know, there are lots of thorny issues around it, and you know, like Justine and Emma, actually, you know, going through the process of doing evaluation, you can see the challenges that organisations face and individuals face within the kind of context of doing evaluation. And I think one of the things that we've seen as part of the kind of co-creation process of the evaluation principles that the Centre for Cultural Value has put together is that those challenges are really live. They haven't gone away. They're still live. And I think also that we're kind of there's perhaps more expectation, but less resource and less time to do the evaluation that we actually really want to do and need to do. I think one of the things that we find is that funders, stakeholders have expectations of us as organisations who are kind of delivering really great cultural activities or heritage activities around monitoring and evaluation that perhaps distracts us from the stuff that actually we really want to do. So consequently, we've been pulled in lots of different directions. And that's really difficult to balance if you've got, as we all have, limited time and limited resources. And that means that kind of the time for really engaging with the people that you work with, the participants and your beneficiaries, is squeezed out in terms of the evaluation potentially, but also the ability for reflection and that kind of critical reflection on what went well, what didn't go so well, how might you then shift and alter your practice in response to that. And it's a really challenging thing to do that when you're kind of, running to keep up. I think the other areas that we kind of have been working on is around failure. And, that's the F word. That's the other dirty word in evaluation. And I suppose one of the things that we really want to do is we really, through the centre, we really want to challenge our policymakers and our funders to say, we've really got to start talking about failure and people to feel confident to talk about their failures as well as their successes. Because the feedback that we get sometimes in terms of both the research and the evaluation within the sector is it's not robust enough. And it's not robust enough because there is an emphasis on advocacy. And I think there's an encouragement of advocacy through our funders. And therefore, we kind of need to be able to feel confident to say that actually failure and success are on a continuum, and we can learn, it's common sense, isn't it? We can learn from our failure, perhaps a little bit, much more than we can from lots and lots talking just about our successes. So I suppose one of the things, all of this has kind of fed into the development of the principles we have pulled together 4 kind of key principles with some sub-principles underneath them. And those are that evaluation should be beneficial, it should be robust, people-centered and connected. And what we're not saying is that this is this is what everybody has to do, but this is the kind of starting point for a discussion. It's a starting point to think about what is really proportional for you as an organization, what is relevant for you, and what benefits are you going to accrue. And actually, if you haven't got the resource or the time to do evaluation in a way that helps you to that benefits you and helps you to kind of direct your future work, do you even do it? Are you actually just are you better off not actually going down that route? But I think if you can kind of think through, and this is what we want to encourage through the kind of the development, the publication of the principles, but also the kind of conversation that goes around it. We really want to encourage a conversation that goes around it, is for people to have a bit of time to think about actually what's completely relevant for them, what's proportional for them, and ways in which therefore that research, that evaluation can become more robust as well. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sue. That's great. I've popped a link in the chat. Joe's popped a link into the Centre for Cultural Value, and I've put a link into a blog post that I referred to, and the link to the principles. I think it's also worth looking at the Failspace project. Yeah. Do look up that. I love that. I discovered that last year, and I've actually used that with one of the organisations I was working with. to get them to think about that idea that things don't always go exactly as you would expect them to, but there is learning in that. And I think one of the challenges for me of that kind of tendency to see evaluation as an end of project report to funder kind of scenario, the end of project report, is that that almost shuts down any conversation about things that might have failed. If the expectation is that you report back and you say, we've met all our outcomes and the project was brilliant, and please can we have our final 10% of funding? And I've sometimes seen, I remember one evaluation brief that asked me to present the final report in the format of an advocacy document. And that's, for me, that's not evaluation. That's setting me up to just tell you the stuff that went well, and the real learning is in the stuff that didn't go quite as expected. So the fail space project is a brilliant one. Somebody has asked if you can give an example of failure, please, Sue. So I'm going to throw that one at you, and I will find you a link for the fail space project, because there is a wheel of failure, which is really worth having a look at.
Yeah, that's a really good. It's a really good question, and you know, basically, I suppose if you set out in terms of your objectives to achieve X, Y, and Z, and that might be to, you know, engage with X number of people, and you've only engaged with you know, 3 people rather than the 10 or whatever, then that could be interpreted as failure, particularly if you kind of just trying to justify on the basis of value for money, and you know, so I don't think I can give you an example of failure, because it's absolutely open to interpretation, isn't it? And actually, and when I say that it's on a continuum, you could say, you know, well, I suppose one end of the continuum would be, we didn't manage to get anybody to engage in this if it's a community-based project, or we simply didn't deliver a project. But then, you know, the success or the value of that would be the understanding of why that happened.
Thanks,
It's a bit of a mealy-mouthed response, but
no, I think what I really like about the fail space wheel, I've just popped a link. I finally worked out how to send the links to everybody rather than just the other panelists. There is a link there to the fail space wheel, and what I really like about that is it breaks down that idea of failure into different facets. So it's a recognition that a project might succeed brilliantly in some areas, might massively exceed expectations in some areas, but in others might not have quite worked for everybody. And often those areas where we might talk about failure in inverted commas is perhaps around participation or around making sure everybody's voices are heard. And it's just a way of thinking in a much more nuanced way, I think, about how we consider successes and failures, and making sure that we look much more holistically. Justine, I'm just going to ask you to talk a little bit about why evaluation is so important in the context of sporting heritage and the organisations that you're working with through the network.
Oh, thanks, Emma. Yeah, so for us, it is absolutely central to what we do. And we're always looking at how do we learn from what we've done wrong as much as what we have done right, both as an organisation, but also for the sector as a whole. So our responsibility is to ensure that we understand what is going on in the sector, that we understand what is needed, and that we understand how to deliver that, both for our audiences, in terms of the individuals and the organisations, but also in terms of that wider audiences. Who is accessing these collections? Is it representative? Is it relevant? Are we being, you know, are we ensuring that we're hearing voices, that there's co-curation? Is that happening? So it's always central to what we're doing. And I suppose we realised maybe about 3 or 4 years ago that we were talking a lot about the role and value of sporting heritage, and about its importance, and about why it should be something that people were doing. But what we realised was, and it was really interesting to hear what you were saying, Sue, that wasn't robust evidence. It was largely anecdotal. And when it came to actually being able to specify why is this important, we knew it was, and we could hear it was, and we could see it was. But in terms of being able to translate that to policymakers and funders in the way that we needed to, we couldn't. And we knew that the sector couldn't in the way that they needed to. So we started to think about how do we change that, and our PhD program is starting to do that. And I can see Bridget's put some comments in the chat. That's really, really central. So some really high quality academic research that is looking at what is the role and value of sporting heritage, what works, what doesn't work, what do we need to do, what do we need to change. That's both in terms of as an organisation structure, but also in terms of the sector. But then we've also then looked at, well, what do we need to do as an organisation? And we kind of use the pandemic to put a little bit of a line in the sand and go, okay, we've got a bit of time to think about what is happening and what isn't happening here. So we commissioned an evaluator, Sonia Raspberry. You'll see we went and did it, to go and look as an independent consultant what is working and what isn't working, and to find a clear understanding of the audiences which engage with sporting heritage across the UK, to find a clear understanding of the gaps in the audiences, how the audiences engage with sporting heritage, how they don't engage with it, physically and digitally, and a clear understanding of what's missing, what opportunities there are to better engage audiences, and then to give us a really practical strategy with very clear action points, all costed, that kind of said, right, this is where we are now, this is what we need to do next. We're always about learning from it to think about the next steps. And what we found, or what Sonia found working with us, was not necessarily something we didn't think was going to be found, but was still something that we kind of went, oh, okay, right. So the audience data is collected inconsistently, generally across the cultural and heritage sector, and that was absolutely replicated within the sporting heritage sector. Evaluation and just generally understanding who the audiences are and what they wanted. It was very difficult to get access to any of that kind of information to be able to understand, are we doing the right thing? Is that working? Isn't it working? The analysis of that information was largely done through things like short-term projects. The biggest thing that you touched on as well, Sue, that lack of time and resources, and that was stated everywhere as the key reason for not collecting that information, not delivering evaluations on projects and programmes as kind of an integral thing, unless it was tasked as something that a project had asked for. So because individuals were really busy and having to deliver their job and then having a project, the evaluation would happen with the projects it had to, rather than why are we doing this? How is our organisation working? And then that being embedded through any project work. There just wasn't the time to think about how to do that. And so we established that there is anecdotal knowledge, lots of it, about our audiences and about the evaluation of those audiences, but it is anecdotal largely. And that there's limited information around that in terms of understanding what the audiences want, in terms of understanding the representation. So for us, that was a really crucial piece of work. We kind of knew it, but again, we wanted to evaluate it ourselves and work out, we think that, but is that accurate? Is that right? And what do we do next to make sure that we can shift that, both as our own organisation, but as a sector? Because it helps us lever an investment for the sector. It helps the sector lever in their own investment, but crucially, it changes our practice. It makes us more relevant. It makes us understand that we are doing what people want. And the Sporting Heritage as the organisation, because we're a network organisation, if we don't deliver what people want, they won't. There's no need for us. So we know it's crucial that we're listening all the time and then embedding what people are asking for. So that's kind of a sort of quick, this is why it's important to us and to the sector. I was going to say about a failure thing. So I have a very quick example from like an hour ago. So that last session, the one that was on nations, should have been a breakout session where we all chatted in our nations specific and we all gained information from each other. It had been planned within an inch of its life. It shouldn't have, there should have been no issues with it. It should have been. And then techie shows, you know what they're like, they just go, it makes it really difficult. But my team are amazing. They planned in all the different ways of making it work. We changed it. The panel were brilliant. They started to think about, okay, we'll do it in a different way. And actually what came out of that, which could have been an absolute like, oh my goodness, it wasn't what we'd planned. It wasn't how we'd imagined it was going to be led. But I gained so much more because everybody was in that group together and we were learning from all the different things that people had been speaking about, and it's changed my thought process already about how I'll deliver those activities going forward, which I wouldn't have learned had that have been a perfect session. So even though you could look at it and go, well, that, oh my goodness, it gave me so much more than it would have done otherwise. So yeah.
Thank you, Justine. We've got live evaluation in practice here. We do have a comment from Bridget. Hello, Bridget. But I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on, because I think, first of all, I just want to pick up on what we've been saying about robustness. We had, Sue commented earlier about funders feeding back that evaluation is often not robust enough. And Justine, you said you found that in your research as well. What do you think we need to do as a sector to make sure that the evaluation we're doing is more robust and rigorous and answers that need from funders and also is more robust and rigorous for ourselves and our own purposes? Sue, I'll come to you first on that one.
Well, I suppose that's kind of like the raison d'etre of the Centre for Cultural Value. This is what we don't have one answer yet, but one of the things that, well, the things that we are doing is we are looking at what academic research there is out there already, because there isn't one repository for the academic research, and that's something that we wish to do. We've started by looking at arts and health as a particular strand of work, because there is a lot of rhetoric around the value of the arts, culture, heritage, screen, etc. in health and well-being, and that's a very live kind of conversation at the moment. So what we wanted to do was to see, okay, well, what real evidence is there out there? And when I talk about real evidence, I'm talking about academically based evidence. So it's based on an agreed methodology, and it's the method is a very kind of key part of the reporting, so people understand how that so people understand how the information was gathered, how it was analysed, and that if somebody wants to, they can replicate that process and should get more or less the same kind of result from going through that process. So, based on that kind of, as it were, scientific method. And by doing that, we are aiming to identify where the gaps are. And by identifying where the gaps are, we will be talking and are continually talking to the research councils to encourage further investment in that. One of the things that I mentioned earlier around the funding, the Collaborate Fund, is that we really want the research to be based in reality. So it's not just blue skies, but it's actually based and with industry partners, so with the sector. So that's another reasons why we're trying to encourage more collaboration between higher education, researchers, PhDs, and people who are working in the sector. Not because people who work within the sectors need to become researchers and experts, but because there are researchers and experts that you can kind of draw on, who are really, really interested in working with you. And also there is a kind of there is a driver within higher education in terms of the impact agenda. So increasingly, research needs to be based in kind of real world problems. And one of the things that we're really keen to do, and when I was working in the Cultural Institute, we understood, and people are increasingly understanding, that you cannot solve, kind of major problems and major issues like kind of health and well-being within communities without coming together across disciplines and across domains. So yeah, I think, there's more I want to say about this, but I'll pause now.
Thanks, Sue. Justine, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah,
I mean, I completely agree with your comments there. So, I mean, I suppose the first thing that I'd be thinking about is, well, what do we mean by robust, and whose definition of robust are we taking? Because like we've spoken about, I guess, in terms of sometimes with the funders, that definition of robust can change and shift, and we don't always know what it means. And we're working in a sector where we're really trying to make a difference with what we do, and we want to show that, but sometimes it can be really difficult to get a grip on, well, what exactly does that mean? Is, I'm giving you this evidence that these people have said these things about what they did here. Is that not telling you what we do? And it's trying to, like I think you say, to support those mechanisms and processes and frameworks that make it as straightforward and easy as possible, so that people who are already busy can just embed it within what they're doing as a general practice, rather than it always being, oh no, I've got to do this for this person, and it's part of that short-term funding process. It's something that becomes a kind of norm. And I definitely echo that, sharing knowledge with academic organisations, and our PhD programme is absolutely driving that for us and supporting that knowledge and ability to work with higher education institutions. And one of the things we've noticed is that impact agenda has slowly shifted people wanting to work with us. The bit that's difficult is the partnerships between the two. So the next session is about research and about collaborative doctoral partnerships, but those collaborative partnerships can be at other levels as well. They don't have to just be at doctoral, and so we're quite interested to work out how else can that happen. How can we bring together cultural institutions or institutions that are working with sporting heritage collections with academics and universities to look at some of these key questions that provide that real robust outcome, but that has made it much more useful for everybody involved, at the same time as not building massive amounts of extra working capacity. So yeah, for me, that's where I think we're looking in terms of robustness.
Thanks, Justine. Yeah, I think, as we were saying earlier, I think you and Sue both referenced the sheer pressure on people working in cultural and heritage organisations to get work done, and often people are overstretched and doing the jobs that 10 years ago might have been done by 2 or 3 people. So evaluation can very easily become just another stress and another challenge. And Roger's pointed out in the chat, robust evaluation is very costly. So yeah, it's not something that every organisation is going to be able to do all the time. He also makes the point that commercial market research organisations evaluate, which, again, there are plenty of commercial organisations out there that do evaluation as well, and they have a place in the wider infrastructure. Given that we were talking about PhD research and that connection with academia, it might be a good time to bring in Bridget's comment from earlier. She mentioned she's doing a PhD looking at how engaging in sporting heritage projects can facilitate social inclusion, and references a case study from a Heritage Fund, HLF funded rugby league theatre project that finished 4 years ago. And she says the evaluation report that was done at the time was helpful and insightful, but talking to the people involved 4 years on has been incredibly illuminating and has allowed me to have a much deeper understanding of the long-term impact. I wonder if there is a place for looking back as well as embedding in the project. Also, I've really enjoyed putting the participants' voice at the centre of my research. And I mean, that's a really good point. A lot of evaluation is done in the now. We're collecting data from people in the process of a project. We're reporting on it relatively soon afterwards. We don't necessarily get that long-term perspective. Is there a role, do you think, for, and maybe this is something, Sue, that academic research could help with, to get a broader overview? I mean, I know there are academics looking at more generally the impact of heritage and culture from a bigger kind of helicopter standpoint. Is that something that the centre is looking to facilitate? And how, if organisations do want to work with academics to strengthen their research, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, it certainly is something that the centre is looking at, and it's some conversations that we've been having with funders as well about the kind of the longer term funding of cultural organisations, which would allow, and I include heritage in that, which would allow that kind of longer term longitudinal studies. I think that suggestion actually of looking back, that you've done a report or you've done your evaluation for a project, and then going back to to those participants. That would be a really light touch way to do it. I think that would be really valuable. There are some examples, but they're very, very rare. We've been working with Born in Bradford, which is a medical study, a longitudinal medical study. They've been following children in Bradford from birth to they're now 13 years old. And they have finally included some questions about culture in that. So potentially there is some really valuable work that can happen coming out of that. But interestingly, they're really challenged because they come from a science sort of research base. They're really challenged by the kinds of research that happens within the cultural sector and the social science research, so the more qualitative aspect of it. But we know that there's some real value in bringing both the quantitative and the qualitative methods together, so that you've got the, as it were, potentially the big numbers or the statistics, but you've also got the stories that illuminate what those statistics mean. And we've actually got some funding from the ESRC to look at how we do that. How do we bring together some quantitative cultural statistic, big kind of data stuff, and link that into qualitative work, which is actually got participants and artists right at the centre of that, and how that could kind of illuminate it for policymakers. And that was one of the comments that I wanted to make, is that around policy, in that depending on where the policy is located, so for example, the DCMS is very interested in economic data and the impact on the economy, and that's because of their relationship with the Treasury, and that's how they're having to build their kind of argument to kind of get the scraps from the table, as it were. But what we're finding in Wales and in Northern Ireland and in Scotland is that kind of policy work around culture and heritage is quite differently located, and therefore the kinds of evidence that they're asking for and that they're perhaps trusting is different. So the Future Gen has had huge influence within Wales in terms of the well-being agenda, and that's where the kind of cultural there tends to be a kind of skew in that area. In Northern Ireland, it's located within communities. So communities and inclusion is a really important aspect of the kind of cultural kind of data that people are looking at. So understanding, if you are having to make the case, understanding, as it were, where the policymakers are coming from actually is quite valuable, because that will help you to kind of design your work. Yeah.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, we do work in a very policy-driven environment, don't we? Even if it drips down to us through Arts Council or Heritage Fund or any other funders, it's still very much guided by that policy level. There's been so much talk about economic impact over the last 10 years or so, and yeah, I've done things like the social return on investment methodologies that are often big and complex and sometimes do more than we really need them to do. But sometimes as case studies can give us really helpful insights. I'm just thinking about what we were saying earlier about how challenging it can be for organisations to get started in evaluation, and how difficult it can be to find the time and to embed it as part of people's everyday work. I'm just wondering what advice you each would give to people who are in that position and who know that they need to do evaluation and want to do evaluation, but want to make the best use of their time and to make sure they're using it as an effective a way as possible. Justine, can I ask you what are your top tips for that? Like we can solve that in the next 10-15 minutes.
That's okay. Now I've worked out, I'm also like now sending things to everybody rather than just the panelists. Yeah, so for me, I'd probably say it's working out, what do you want to find out? Why are you doing this? because so frequently, as we've mentioned throughout this, that driver often comes from outside of the organisation. So you're doing it because someone's telling you to do it. Well, that's always going to be difficult in terms of how you embed that in your day-to-day work and your organisational change, because it's not coming from within. So I'd always kind of say, let's start there. What do you want to learn? Why do you want to do it? It's kind of the same rules as funding. Don't go and just try and grab any funding. What do you want to do, and go and get the funding that you need to be able to do that. So I'd start there, and then depending on what you want to do or what you want to learn about is going to define how you need to go and find that, whether that be through focus groups, be through setting up steering groups, having virtual discussions, whatever that might be, will be dependent on what you want to find out. And for us, because we are asked frequently about, I want to do evaluation, I know I need to do it, but I'm not quite sure where, it's been quite a crucial part of our toolkit, because we want people to be able to feel that it isn't this big onerous thing, that you've got to have a person who's specifically delivering evaluation, but it's something that everybody, or even if you just have one person in your organisation, can do to a level, and it can be quite a straightforward thing. So I've put a link to the evaluation toolkit. Please do go and have a look at it. We've set it out based on what the sector have asked. So we work with lots of different people in the sector. Some are coming from museums backgrounds, some are coming from sport and governing body backgrounds, and various other areas. We've found that people have said they want different levels. So we've got a level 1, a level 2 and a level 3, depending on where you are in the sector and what you've already done, so that you can dip in and out of that and go, okay, right, I've already done that first bit, now I'm ready for something else. But if you just do the first level, that will give you some information and some knowledge about what you're doing right, what isn't working, and then how you can shift your practice. So I think for me, that would be my kind of like starting point. Why do you want to do this? What is it going to tell you about what you want to change? Will you be able to change it? And then go and work out, how can I do it? Yeah.
That's an important one, actually, not just what do I want to change, but will I be able to change it? So I think making sure that evaluation is, if you're looking to use evaluation, you're doing it in an area where you have agency and you have the capacity to make changes. Because I've often things come up in evaluation that you actually, with the best will, can do very little about. So I think
that's crucial, isn't it, as well? If we're talking about a lot of the work that we're doing is with communities and with individuals that we are trying to build trust with, what we need to be clear what we can and can't do. And if we're saying to people, we're evaluating this and we're going to make all these changes, but actually we can't, we're not being truthful, and therefore we're not going to be trustworthy. So I think it's understanding that to an extent and being honest about it from the start, building that into whatever you do, and just feeling like, well, if I do something, I'm starting on that path. But just being honest about it is what I've always found is the most, people want you to be honest. They're prepared to come with you as long as they feel like you're giving them a really clear picture about what you can do and what you will try and achieve. Just from my experience, yeah.
Yeah, you're right, being clear about your capacity for change. And I think often sharing the outcome of the evaluation with the people who've contributed to it, which often hasn't happened in the past. I mean, I've been very guilty of doing that, of doing the evaluation report, talking to loads of people, and then I write the report and it goes to the organisation and the funder. And what about all those people I've talked to along the way? So that's something I think everybody is becoming much more conscious of. I certainly am, about building that in. How are we going to feed back to people? How are we going to pitch back what they've told us and check, just sense check that we've interpreted this correctly? Because a lot of evaluation is around how you interpret the data and the evidence that you've got, and that needs to be verified by the people that you've worked with. Sue, do you have anything to kind of, any advice or recommendations for people who are grappling a bit with how to make best use of evaluation?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Justine and you have said, and I think just to add, don't get too hung up on the methodology, but actually trust your instincts, because you kind of know what you need to do, and you kind of know the kind of questions that you need to ask, but also I'd kind of building on what Justine was saying about the people that you're working with and the people that you want to impact, have impact with, talk to them as well. Make sure that you've kind of got a whole range of different voices there, so that in evaluation research terms, you're triangulating your data, so that you're kind of understanding, you're coming from a whole range of different perspectives. So therefore you kind of got that 360 degree understanding of it. And as I say, don't get too hung up on the kind of research aspect of it. It should be beneficial, and the benefit should be around you being able to kind of do what you do better and benefit people more broadly.
Thank you. We've got another comment from Bridget about, which I think picks up on what we were saying perhaps earlier, around robustness, combining qualitative and quantitative research and struggling with the concept of proof. And I think that's a very pertinent comment. How do you prove anything when you're talking about people's life experiences? And talking about use of our participant voice. This is something I was thinking about earlier, Justine, when I came to your really helpful session about neurodiversity. And one of the things it got me wondering was, how do we ensure that evaluation is genuinely inclusive and that we're making sure we're enabling everybody to participate in a way that is appropriate to them and might not necessarily fit our framework and the set of evaluation tools that we've established that we are going to use. But I just wondered if you've got a perspective on that, on what we can do. I mean, we need to.
Yeah, how long have we got left?
Generally, but we've got 9 minutes.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, if we're talking in terms of context of neurodivergence, I mean, the way that the heritage sector works has barriers everywhere for allowing people to access what we do and to also share whether what we're doing is right. A lot of the things we ask is for written work. We ask for people to talk to us. We want face-to-face contact. We don't set up so many routes that people can share information with us that's really informal. We don't go and find where they are. We just expect everyone to come to us frequently. There are some really, really good mechanisms of practice and really good pockets of activity that's happening, but largely because we're so busy, because we've got so much going on, it's difficult to then be able to think sometimes, actually, I want to talk to this audience. This is the information that I need. How am I going to do that so that I'm making sure I'm removing those barriers? And it's something we've been trying to do quite a lot. What are those barriers? And the only way of finding that out is asking, what stops you, what prevents you from accessing what we're doing, so that you can tell us what's wrong. And it's just that constant communication. And I can't remember who said it earlier, I think it might have been you, Emma, about evaluation isn't just this one-off thing. It's something that you're doing constantly and throughout your activity, and you're always asking and you're always finding out what is it that we can do. And for me, that's central to what we do. And part of it's come from the barriers that I face in terms of, well, where, how do I access that? And, everybody as an individual have, things that will be tricky and they'd rather communicate in a different way. And I think as a sector, we need to really, really be starting to think, not just saying we want to remove those barriers and doing little bits, but really starting to go and talk to the communities we're asking and ask the right questions and do it in a way that is accessible. And we have to change our workforce to do that, and we have to change our representation to do that. It's not something that we can all just keep going, oh, here we are 10 years on, we're still not changed things. Why have we not changed things? Oh, look, we all are the same. So I think there's a massive shift that needs to happen within the sector. And I think it's where I find evaluation tricky, because essentially that's the bit that should be shifting us, and it isn't shifting us because we are using it in these little pockets of activity. So yeah, I will stop.
No, you're absolutely right. It's not just an evaluation issue, is it? It's a sector issue. Sue, you want to comment on that?
I wonder also, where, there've been some really great examples of, one method that people have described as deep hanging out, which is, it's so integrated in the way that you actually approach the work that you're doing within the community, because the program itself absolutely builds in the necessity to have really strong relationships with the people that you're working with. And that obviously that takes investment in a huge investment in time. But actually, if it's about the shape of what the program is, and you're learning, you're jointly learning what it is that's working, what isn't working, how you might make this better as you're going through the process. So a genuine kind of genuine formative evaluation process. Then your evaluation isn't separate from, but it's absolutely integral to the way that you operate, because the process is iterative. That's not, obviously that is not going to work in every context, but it is a way of thinking about actually your program design is, how top down is it? Can it be more bottom up? And how can you kind of integrate the people that you want to work with and who want to work with you actually in the design, in the delivery, and then in the reflection of the program afterwards. How you document that, how robust that is at the end, I don't know, but well, there would be questions about its robustness, but also sort of putting that aside, that thing about proof is you will never be able to prove it to somebody who doesn't want to believe you. So you can throw all the research, all of the to somebody, and you can still not actually convince them. So there isn't a kind of, there isn't a silver bullet here. Actually, it's about dialogue, it's about building credibility, it is about advocacy around it as well. So there's as I say, there isn't a kind of clear path to, if you do this, then you're going to get that, and then the result is that everybody's going to believe you. But actually, that's not the case. Sorry, that sounds really negative, but actually, I hope that's liberating. I hope, and it's from that point of view that actually what you do, the importance of what you do is that it comes back and is beneficial to your organisation.
Absolutely, thanks, Sue. I do think that's liberating. I think on my kind of reflecting back on 20 odd years of doing evaluation, I think one of the things I've learned many times along the way is that there is no right way. There is no one methodology or technique that's going to solve this particular problem for me. It's very much an iterative process, and it's constantly evolving and developing. And the work that you're doing at the Centre for Cultural Value really kind of exemplifies that. I have it up on my screen at the moment, and your evaluation principles, one of which is people-centered, talking about being empathetic, many-voiced and socially engaged. But the little heading under that is that this is the start of the conversation. So it's about this being developmental and thinking through how our practice evolves, not just how we demonstrate the brilliance of what we're doing, but how we continue to do it better. And so much of that is about listening to people and working with people, not just asking questions and getting a response, but really genuinely deeply listening to people and enabling them to have agency and putting them in control of much more of what we do. And that's a direction that the sector is going in, and it feels like a very positive and productive one. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to come to both of you in turn for any final comments before we close. Sue, I'll come to you first, and then Justine for a final sporting heritage kind of comment on the session. Sue.
Thanks Emma, and thank you everyone for a really enjoyable session. I think I just wanted to finish by saying we are at the centre, we really genuinely want to people to be participating in the conversation with us around the evaluation principles. And any comments that you have about that, please just let us know. You can contact me directly or have a look at the website. Really genuinely want to kind of make them useful and workable.
Fantastic, thank you. Justine.
Oh yeah, thank you both as well, and everybody for your comments. And yeah, it's been brilliant listening to you both talk about this and its relevance to sporting heritage. And we'll definitely come and talk to you, Sue, about more about how we can integrate. But I'd recommend to anybody who's listening to go and ask Sue about the money. Go and find out what that's about. We're always trying to help the sector out to go and see how they can do things differently and where there's pots of funding to help that. Brilliant. The only other thing I was going to say is the next session that's about research, we are talking there about those collaborative partnerships. So when you're saying about how people might find academics, that's something we're thinking about, and we're definitely thinking about some kind of speed dating version of how cultural institutions can come together with academia. And it's something we've talked with a lot of academics about, as well as the sector. So we might talk about that again in that next one, but look out for when that session happens.
Brilliant, thanks Justine. So all that's left for me to do is to thank both of our panellists, Sue and Justine. Thank you so much, Joe, for keeping everything running in the background. And thank you to everybody for attending. I hope you found this useful. We will circulate all of the links afterwards, and if you've got any further questions about anything we've talked about, do get in touch and we'll do our best to help. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you and goodbye.